and thank you all for joining us today. This is our 6th or 7th in a series of WIOA Title I performance webinars that we've been presenting starting back in October of last year. I did mention in the chat that we do welcome those from the Youth Career Pathway grants. We welcome all of you, obviously, but many of you have been participating throughout this series, while some of you, this may be your first time joining us. So in today's webinar, especially, just be mindful that some of the information may be repetitive because we do and did expect some of those Youth Career Pathway grantees. And so we apologize for some of the repetition. We will kind of gloss over it a little bit faster today. So if any of you kind of miss some of the meaning of some of the slides, feel free to put your questions in the chat pod. Paul and I are always available after webinars, and we'll give you that information at the end of the session today. We're always available to answer your questions and help you understand and clarify performance. It's not an easy subject, even for all of us that deal with performance on a daily basis. So we do welcome any challenges you might have in understanding this. This is our performance team here at the State Office of Employment and Training. Patty Schnorr is our manager over both the performance unit and our systems. Many of you are familiar with her and the Illinois Workforce Development System, as well as guiding our team at the Illinois WorkNet Center and the systems we have over there. Paula Berry is our resident kind of expert, I say. She's been around the performance area for quite a while. So we are proud to have her as part of our team and helping us get through everything. I'm Mark Burgess. I'm the performance manager. Been in the WIOA system now for about 16 years. Started in policy, moved on to work with the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, and now I've been with performance for almost 2 years now. So again, we welcome everyone and look forward to any questions you might have as we proceed through this. Today, we're going to go over youth-specific program performance. So please be mindful of that, and any questions you have, make sure they're related to youth. We've gone over the measures in general and in detail previously for all of the programs, but we wanted to break this down specifically for those youth and those grantees to make sure you all understand how they're unique in many areas. Want to ensure that you can understand the accountability and reporting requirements. We'll talk about a little bit of the timeline there so that you know when you need to be submitting information that ultimately relates to performance outcomes. We want to ensure that you understand how a youth participant could achieve either positive or negative outcomes once they're into a measure. And so we'll discuss, Paul will discuss some of the key elements of determining the outcome in that realm. And then we'll go over some of the definitions as we lead into this so that you understand some of the terminology we're going to be using. We all have to comply and abide by multiple sets of regulations, laws, and guidance. So here, just in brief, are some of those that we talk about on a regular basis. We have the statute, WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act statute. All of our performance is in that section 116. We have some final regulations and final rules that we have to be mindful of. And you can see some of the sections there related to performance again. We issue state policies and guidance as well. So, for all of you that are at the local level under our Title I umbrella, you're probably most familiar with these, but some of you that are new to the programs and our partners or from the Youth Career Pathway grantees, just be mindful that you're obligated to the same things we are. And so we try to help you out by issuing these policies and guidance and holding these webinars to continue to inform you. And if you have questions, please try and find who in your local area might be the performance individual that you should lean on, or reach out to Paula and I, as I mentioned before. Here's some links. The next two slides, I won't go through all of these, but this gets you an easy access. If you download the PowerPoint presentation for today, all of these should be linkable. You'll be able to go to some of the more important areas where we do get our legislation, regulations, and guidance from. as well as some, these top 3 or 4 are really specific guiding tools and entities that the Department of Labor puts out. We have a policy site, the e-policy we call it, where we talk about performance in more detail about and the requirements that we expect of all of you as grantees and as partners. Why do we do this? We all know that we are funded through federal funds, some cases rarely, but in some cases there are additional funds from other partners in the state that go into some of the work we do. So we have expectations to meet, and those come with performance outcomes. We need to make sure that we're aligning all of our work across partners, across local areas, and we want to make sure that we are streamlining or DOL, I guess should say, through the WIOA Act, streamlined performance indicators from previous iterations of the Act. We want to make sure just we're assessing everyone appropriately so that we can be good, good users of the system, good, protectors of the funds. And so we want to make sure you all understand how that relates to performance. We got to use data in everything we do. So here are some systems references and data elements that you should be aware of. Again, if you're a grantee, you need to know through your grant agreements what systems you're going to be expected to use in reporting your outcomes. We have timelines for reporting, and so we show this because we want to make sure that all of you recognize that we need your data, your information from participants entered into your systems of record in a timely fashion so that we can be timely in reporting the Department of Labor along this timeline and ensure that we are getting them the information they can use to develop our final outcomes. We have multiple ways of developing our outcomes as far as calculating them. And one of them that's new to WIOA and new in the last several program years is adjusting the outcomes or the goals after a program year is complete. So we're still waiting on that for the program year 2020 completed several months ago. Hope to get that cleared up and get final outcomes from Department of Labor so that we can then reach out to all of you at the local level with your final outcomes as adjusted through the statistical adjustment model in SAM. That is a component of the calculation that captures actual characteristics of participants and economic conditions. We all know we're still in the midst of a pandemic that we know have affected all of our operations and potentially affected participant successes. So this statistical adjustment model accounts for that, and we will incorporate it into your final outcomes. We all have expectations for the youth program. These are what we're expected to meet at the state level. All of the local areas have their own negotiated goals for the youth program. Again, for grantees, you should know through your grant agreement what your expectations for performance are. It could be similar to what the state expectations are. It might be more in line with your local goals. And so you would, again, want to reach out to your local partners to find out what your outcomes should be as you start reporting them. Back to reporting success and outcomes. It all starts with reporting activities and services that are achieved and completed by your participant pool. And so we ask that you all get those into your system within 10 days of it occurring so that we can be, again, timely. We'll talk more about program exits later in brief, but we are going to be doing a session on programs as exits specifically. So you might want to note that in the future. We'll talk about the date for that and what that entails at the end of today. And again, I mentioned your grant recipients. You need to be looking at your grant agreements to find out exactly what it is you're expected to achieve through the work you do utilizing those grants. Now we get to the definitions here. These are very critical for understanding performance. You have to know if we're talking about someone that's in the measure or not, and then understand if they're a positive or a negative outcome. And to know if they're in the measure, you need to know if they're actually a participant or not. So these first two definitions and key terms relate to someone that, first, if they're only a reportable individual, are only receiving self-services, they're helping themselves maybe in a resource room. Maybe the staff has given them very minimal information, but has not guided them through detailed information or screens or things like that. So at that point, they're a reportable individual. We don't account for any reportable individuals in performance outcomes. However, if more service is given through the center, through the staff of a one-stop center, they might become a participant based on the fact they might reach certain criteria. That includes eligibility determination. And then for youth, it's kind of similar, but there's a little bit more that you have to be mindful of before you're considered a youth participant. And that includes ensuring that they are receiving at least one of the 14 youth program elements. It's the same for both in school and out of school youth. There's different criteria for each of those as far as eligibility. Not being an eligibility minded webinar today, we're not going to go into all that, but just be mindful again that youth participants have a few more criteria to them in order to be determined eligible. Co-enrollment, for many of us in the Title I program, we're very familiar with some sister programs such as the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act that is also under the WIOA umbrella, that people are, some of our participants are co-enrolled in both the trade program and WIOA, such as the adult program. In some instances, co-enrollment might occur between the WIOA Title I youth and adult program if they meet eligibility criteria for both programs. So it's important to understand that you might be under multiple programs, and as such, you would be subject to potentially performance measures and outcomes for both or all if there are more than two co-enrolled programs. Period of participation for performance is very critical, because we got to know if you're receiving certain services, activities, or if they're occurring during participation, or if they're occurring after program exit. And again, Paula will discuss how these relate to the performance measures when we get turn it over to her. We work on a program year basis. That means we're working from July 1st to June 30th for performance. It's not calendar basis. So when you hear quarters, they're not your typical January to March as first quarter. Rather, they're July 1st through September 30th is the first quarter of a program year. And then finally, we do mention common exit here, although it probably won't relate to most of us. Common exit from a WI perspective relates to when someone is receiving services from multiple programs that can be tracked. The services can be tracked across all of them. An individual should not be exited until they're complete with all of their services from all of the programs and have no planned services, and those services haven't occurred for a period of 90 days. So, just kind of being mindful of some of these definitions here. The last few, again, related to performance outcomes are employment or unsubsidized employment. And then in some cases, we have to track wages through supplemental wage information. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. Here are 5 youth measures, primary indicators of performance. I'm going to turn it over to Paula now, who's going to start going through each of these one by one and identifying where the differences for the youth program lie.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, just like Mark said, I'm going to talk about our performance measures and how they apply to youth specifically. The first measure that we're going to explain today is called the employment rate or education or training in the second quarter after exit. So for youth, this is the measure, and it's your percentage of participants who are in employment or education or training in the second quarter after you exit them from the program. So this is based on the date you exit them. We're tracking them and looking for this employment or education outcome 2 quarters later. I'll go ahead and state this at the beginning of this presentation. This is one of the main differences that sets the youth employment rate measures apart from our other programs that we track performance on, like adult and dislocated worker. Youth have this extra outcome or extra way they can attain success in this measure, which is exactly what the measure states, education or training. For our other programs, you have to have employment. If you're not employed in the second quarter after exit, you're not a positive. But youth, we can look at their other outcomes and they'll be a positive. So on our please note section moving forward, we always note like some other operational parameters, and success is achieved through enrollment in secondary education, post-secondary education, occupational skills training on top of any employment that's reported. So if you know a youth isn't in employment, but they went on and got into some college on their own, the second quarter after exit, that is recorded in the system of record, and they're a positive. That's an employment success for youth in this measure. So this is key for youth. This is a lot of information, I know, but just getting right into it. So as most of us know, if someone's in unsubsidized employment, we get those wages. We upload them into our system by a data match. We're going to know if they're working probably before, there's a data lag, but we'll have that information uploaded into the system. There's no manual entry usually required for that. However, for these extra youth outcomes, there's no way we will ever know that a youth exiter went ahead and got back into secondary or post-secondary or some other type of training after you exit them. But how we will know is during follow-up. So if they tell you that, it can be documented, put in the system is the main key there, and then that's a success. That is your second quarter your LWIA or your grant program. So that was a lot on that measure, but I'm going to go on to the next youth measure. And this is a very long presentation. Slides like this we included for sure because it's a great reference. If you keep this PowerPoint and ever question these measures, you can always go back and then look at the exact rules and the exact way we calculate it. And it's just the number of your youth participants who you exited in a reporting period, and you divide that number by exactly the it's the number of your youth who are employed in their second quarter after exit divided by everyone you exited. So that percentage may reflect a goal, like Mark pointed out, like your 77% for your youth who had employment or education 2 quarters after they exit. So that's how we come to the calculation and how we come up with those percentages that we determine success or failure on. It's all about performance, success, or failure, and how it reflects how our WIOA services help those youth. So we can assume that some good services provided, some follow-up led to outcomes like employment and more education. So that's all youth employment second quarter after exit. And next slide, please. Okay, our second youth measure is for the employment. It's identical to everything I just said about employment rate or education or training for youth, but it applies to a youth exiter's 4th quarter after they exit. So now you have your youth and we're looking at their second quarter. We also look at these outcomes in their 4th quarter after exit. So one measure is identical, besides the fact that it's two different quarters that we're measuring, that we're tracking. And so if you think about it for employment rate or education, 4 quarters after they exit, that's like basically a year that we are following up with them post-exit to track these outcomes. And as we all know, this is required for youth. May sound easier than it is, but that follow-up all the way to the 4th quarter after exit could prove major performance success when we're calculating all this data. Next measure, please. our next measure, I said next measure, it's next slide. So this is, again, a reference for your employment or education rate for youth in the fourth quarter after exit. It tells you exactly how we come up with that percentage when someone says, oh, this is your goal for employment or education for youth in your fourth quarter after exit. It's 76%. Well, this is how you determine where you are at, your specific outcome. And supplemental wage is allowed to verify employment. And then again, what we'll talk about at the end is there are specific reasons for exiting someone, for exiting a youth, and then they will not be counted in this measure. And that is talked about in detail at the end of the presentation. So just so you're aware of that. But for the first two measures I talked about, all of your youth that you enroll and provide one service, whether they're in 1 quarter, 5 days, are going to be in those first two employment rate, second or fourth quarter measures. So that's very important to realize too. You're on the hook for those measures for all your youth. So the third measure is called median earnings. And this measure for youth is actually median earnings in the second quarter after exit. So what this means, it's the median earnings, when we take the wages, of participants who are in unsubsidized employment during their second quarter after exit. So basically, it's as simple as this. We take all of your youth who are in employment in their second quarter after exit, and their wages are put in a list, literally in a list. And to find the median, we take the middle wage out of that list. If it's an even number, we have to take the two middle and then they're averaged. But anyway, so that's how we come up with this measure. If you ever see how we come up with this outcome, if you ever say your goal for youth is 3,800, that's all it means. Out of all your youth, if their wages in the second quarter were put into a list, the median wage needs to be, at least your goal or 10% thereof. But that's very important. The other thing with this measure is only your youth who are in employment in their second quarter after they exit will even be counted. The youth who are definitely positives in your employment and education rate in the second quarter after exit, well, they're going to help you in that measure. But since maybe they didn't have employment, they won't be in this because we don't have wages to put in a list. So that is different for youth a little bit because they have that extra way to count in your other measures as positives. So next slide, please, Mark. And this is just a good reference, an example of the calculation. Just like I said, the wages of your second quarter after exit, youth who are employed are put in a list. And for example, if these were your youth wages after they exited, that middle number would be pulled out, and that is technically your outcome for median earnings for youth. It's the value in the middle. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is just another reference slide that I won't really get into, and we'll always take questions as they come up. There are different methods for calculating this in the system. So you guys are reporting, but we rely on our system of record to report to the federal government. And then when you're recording supplemental wages, like if they bring you a pay stub, some might be, different ways of calculating 4 weeks employed or an entire quarter. And this is just a reference for calculating those wages. Next slide, please. This is more operational parameters that you need to know, and it's another reference we're including. And I pretty much explained it conversationally when I first started talking about the median earnings measure for youth, but it just reiterates youth participants and earnings are excluded for youth who obviously are not employed in their second quarter after exit, who don't have any earnings, zero income, subsidized employment, anyone who is in a federally funded or subsidized employment, or any youth who you exited for one of those reasons that totally exclude them from performance reporting. That's a reference slide if you ever wonder about any of those situations when you're serving youth. Next slide, please. So I am kind of looking at the chat, but if there are any questions, we can stop and go ahead and ask. I know I'm going through these measures pretty quickly, but I just want to make sure we have time to provide a few scenarios that are really descriptive and helpful for understanding these measures. So it doesn't look like there are any questions. I can give it a second, or Mark, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so now we will be looking at the last two performance indicators for youth. And I just want to point out, if you kind of if you want to compartmentalize these measures, these different indicators in your head for purposes of performance reporting, because there's a lot. I always look at the first three measures as like employment-based, wage-based. Obviously, they're kind of wondering if you were employed. If you were, what were your earnings? Of course, for youth, it wants to know, hey, you exited them from your program. Maybe they're not working a year after you exited them, but it's great that they're in post-secondary education. So that's a positive. So that's the first three measures, and basically all your youth are going to be counted. Moving on, we're going to talk about the last two measures, and they're related to training outcomes. What went on with youth who were actually in training during your program? So next slide, please. Okay, so the fourth measure and the first one that is looking at how WIOA funded training helped your youth is called Youth Credential Attainment Rate. And these are the percentage of your participants who were enrolled in education or training during the program, divided by everyone who exited the program. So it's looking for credentials, just like it says. One thing to remember with youth is that it's only your youth who received education or training, and youth who were on OJT or customized training and you provided that, they're not going to count in this measure. That's not training for youth. Second point that is very, very important to realize and always think about when serving youth are that all youth who come in and are in school, we see it all the time, they're in school youth, ISY. Application, they are included in this credential attainment rate measure no matter what. So if they come in school and you're serving them and a year later they drop out and they go through the program for a year or more or however long, receiving no education, they will be in this measure when you exit them no matter what. So all in-school youth are on the hook for a credential. There's a special rule related to this measure called credential attainment, and I will talk about it a little more, but in a nutshell, it's basically like for youth in your credential attainment rate measure, if they just get a high school diploma, that is not enough. But there is a way to count as a positive, to count for a credential. So if you only have your high school diploma and you exit them, if you can document that they end up in employment a year after follow-up or in some type of post-secondary education, there's your positive. So that's the special rule if you have someone who only ever got a high school diploma or the equivalent. One more thing about this measure, but next slide, please, and I'll make sure to point out. This goes into who is in the measure. From the first slide, I just want to point out, in addition to the fact that all in-school youth are in the measure, And there's the special rule for the credential attainment rate measure for youth. You have 365 days to attain a credential after the program. So anytime in the program a participant earns a credential, that's reported and that counts, but they also have 365 days after they exit. So there's a lot of different things going into this measure that actually make it very attainable to achieve success in this measure. You have more time. So reiterating, who is in the measure? All in-school youth at eligibility are included in the measure. Out-of-school youth who, during your program year, are enrolled in any of the following training, like occupational skills training, secondary education, post-secondary education, adult education, youth builder job course. Those are considered education or training for youth that will include an out-of-school youth in the measure. So an out-of-school youth coming in, and maybe they just need some basic, individualized career services or just some of the 14 youth elements. You provide them, but no training. That out-of-school youth is not going to be included in the credential attainment measure, because if you think about it, why would they be? You're not doing anything for them that would get them a credential. It's the out-of-school youth who you enroll, for example, in the occupational skills training, that automatically you're on the hook for making sure they bring that training into fruition by attaining a credential. Of course, there's your exclusions, because this measure is based on when you exit them. The clock starts at exit, and at that point, if they don't already have their credential, they've got 365 days or 1 calendar year. So that is a good reference to always remember who is in this credential attainment measure when we're talking about youth. Next slide, please. Again, this slide, I won't read it, but it is the exact calculation that is in the WIOA Title I regulations. So if you're ever wondering about how the rate is calculated, I don't know if this is like 74% or something for youth. So 74% of youth, for example, that's not your goal, who exit the program need to attain a credential or meet the special rule up to 1 year after they exit. So when you put it in those terms, that's way over half of your youth who need to have a credential. And then that in turn is your performance success. Those are all your positives, all the credentials. Next slide, please. Okay, so very important when we talk about this measure is what types of credentials count. So secondary school diploma counts based on the special rule, post-secondary education credentials. And we're talking about associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, for VR program, graduate degrees, occupational licenses like CNAs, occupational certificates, registered apprenticeships, certain industry recognized technical educational certificates, occupational certifications like automotive service excellence. If it's industry recognized, that's something that definitely would count as a post-secondary credential for the purposes of reporting a success in this measure. Some other ones you want to look at, this is a whole section of its own when we get talking about credentials, but you need to realize that these credentials earned by your participants who you put in training are what we're looking for and are what you're reporting to let us know you provided the types of services that helped your participants, your youth participants, attain this. Because we all know there's many times they can be in a training and they don't end up with the credential. So that's very important. So next slide, please. This is a reference slide that would be handy to keep and it's kind of like a little cheat sheet. So things to think about when you're trying to figure out, does this count as a credential or not? Should I sit down and put this in the system and select it as this person's credential or not? So that is a good reference, because I don't want to read it to you right now. But next slide, please. Okay, this is another good reference too that I will explain. Certificates that do not count for the credential attainment measure. We are not saying that these don't count for anything. They're useful, but they are not the credential that is attached, manually recorded, put into the system by all of our users. But these will not count as a positive or performance success. And these are just some examples of many. And the reason is why they don't count, if you think about it, is because they don't really document a technical or industry recognized or occupational skills type of success to advance within an occupation. They're probably helpful and employers like to see them and they could help you do your job, but they're not the credential. And some examples like this that we see are like an OSHA 10 or OSHA 30 safety courses, work readiness, and like food handlers certificates, other certificates like CPR and first aid certification, completion of like an orientation, a one-day orientation, and someone hands you a certificate of completion, any like workforce innovation board certificates that were created. They are usually associated with WIOA type. For youth, they wouldn't be training. Definitely youth that are participating in some of the other youth elements and career services probably come up with these, but they probably aren't in training and they're not counted towards that youth credential attainment rate. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, and at this, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Burgess for a second to go over this scenario about youth.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And once we go through this scenario, we've got quite a few questions, so I think we should answer those related to credential attainment or the other measures before we move on to MSG. So here we have a scenario for those of you who have been familiar with our webinar series. We would like to throw some of these in here to see what your level of understanding of the measure is, sometimes before we go over the information and sometimes after. So here's one. We've just gone over the youth credential attainment rate measure. And so Jose is an in-school youth, as Paula said, ISY is how we use an acronym for that, that is attending high school when he joins the program. After his junior year, the family moves away to another state. So the individual exits the program because he's no longer receiving services with a date of June 30th, 2020. The program here in Illinois still hopes he'll earn his high school diploma in the other state within 365 days or one calendar year. Really, the critical thing is one calendar year because, as I mentioned to some of our colleagues yesterday, in a leap year, it would actually be 366 days. So it is within one calendar day. So if he exits the program on June 30th, 2020, he has to attain the credential by June 30th of 2021, one full calendar year. So in this instance, this is the career planner conducting the one-year follow-up that's required of youth participants in the program, finds out that the individual did in fact receive his high school diploma on May 15th, 2021. So the question isn't necessarily whether the individual is a positive in the credential. We're just wondering if the individual is in their credential attainment measure. And pick the most appropriate response here of the four you see. No, he's not even in the credential. No, or he would be in the measure, but he's a negative. The third one is yes, and actually he's a positive because he earned his high school diploma within that one calendar year we talked about after exit. Or no, none of the above, because we just don't have enough information to determine if they're in the measure or positive or negative or not. So we've got some good responses. It looks like the majority of you are indicating that yes, Jose is a positive because he's earned his diploma within 1 calendar year after exit. A few of you are responding to the other 3 options. And in fact, the actual correct answer, we'll jump back there, is B. The individual, Jose, is in the measure, but he's a negative, and we'll tell you why here in a moment. It all in school youth, so we're going to kind of step by step walk through how you determine this. All in school youth, we've said, are in this measure, credential attainment. So we know he's going to be either a positive or negative. He's not going to be excluded from the measure, at least because we don't have any other indication of why he would be excluded. He would be a negative because there's no indication Jose achieved an outcome that's acceptable to get a positive in this measure, which would include employment or enrollment in post-secondary education or training within 1 year after exit. Yes, he did return to high school and get his diploma, but remember, that's not post-secondary education or training. So that's why he's a negative outcome in this measure, because from what we know, he did not go on to either the employment or post-secondary education or training. Further, Paula talked about the special rule, and we'll maybe touch on that a little bit more. But when he's enrolled in high school after moving, a special rule applies when a participant obtains only that secondary school diploma, which he's done, or its recognized equivalent. So it could be the GED or some other high school equivalency, whereby they must meet an additional condition to be counted as a success. These participants, again, back to our reasoning of why B is the answer, these participants must be employed or enrolled in the education or training leading to recognized post-secondary credential. And this individual, again, through what we know, did not do that. Had he been employed, we would have wages and could have been earned follow-up before his high school diploma as the date or at any point in the year period, 1 year period of follow-up. So as some of those questions were coming in the chat, I was looking at them and just want you to think through this yourself, and then we'll answer those questions. But the key to this is not the order in which they're achieved. So if this individual is in high school, and let's say when they moved, it was in May at the end of 1 school year, and he's waiting to start school again in August, and he decides to get a part-time job during the summer, he would have been counted as a success, even though he hadn't graduated high school yet, because it doesn't matter that the employment happened before graduating high school or vice versa. It's the fact that they've either been employed or gained that post-secondary credential. So, in this instance, we weren't told that. Going back to this scenario, we're just trying to go with what we had here on the screen, and we could certainly build this out with many more variables and understanding of the services the individual participated in while they were in the program here in Illinois before they left the state. But with just these 3 bits of information, the answer again is B. So hopefully you can kind of walk through that in your own minds, and that's why kind of one of the examples of why we did want to have this session, because there's just so much more to think about these special rules and when things happen and what needs to happen to become a positive after we know they've been included in the measured denominator. So Paula, let's go ahead and go through. We had about 5 or 6 questions here. I'm going to jump to one that's related to an employment measure, if I can find it first, just because we talked about that first.
I answered one to Fanaya, and then
okay, I'm not. Yep.
Where are you?
So we'll just go down these in order. I can't find that one readily. I don't want to spend a lot of time. So will the credentials that an individual participant earns in our training program count for this? And I think the key to this is what Paula just said when she went through what does count, what types of credentials are acceptable. And so if if the training program leads to one of these credentials while you're working with them, yes, they would become a positive in that measure. I'm trying to help Paula out here, but Paula helped me out too. As you're the lot longer, many more years on this. But if I'm misspeaking or not clear, make sure you help me out here. But this one, yes, certainly, if they earn these while they're in your program, it doesn't matter that they earn them before exit. Doesn't matter they earned them before they got their high school education, their diploma, etc. It's just the fact that they earned them. And so if it's
So
one of these
that
kind of
question,
credentials,
I just want to, it's easier, who asked that, if I can
yeah,
read that.
Deanna, if you kind of put in the chat where you're from, if you're one of our grantees and that's why you're asking, or one of our youth training providers or service providers, yeah. We'll get back.
In the
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next one while you're looking for that, Paula. For the next one is employment rate.
It's an application. So if someone came in and already had their associates and you had them, you very well would enter that they have associates as their credential, but you couldn't count it as the credential for WIOA reporting purposes. It has to happen at application date or after in program or a year after exit. So you can't count degrees or anything like that that happened before you served them. Just to explain a little further, I'm not sure, but please email me with that.
Yeah, that's key, because while we want to take credit for as much as we can and get as high a level of measure outcomes on all these indicators of performance, we got to be mindful. We can only take credit for the things we help them get, and that's what the whole participation period and follow-up period is.
I see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next question is for the employment rate measure. Does adult education count as secondary education? I'll let you answer that one, Paula.
Yes. So Sally, by adult education, you mean adult secondary. So for youth, are you saying if you exit someone and they're not going to be working, but if they're in secondary adult ed in the second or fourth quarter after exit, then that would be the youth outcome that would count. So yes, for the employment or education rate measures, secondary education counts. It doesn't count for the special rule, but yes, for the first two measures, those employment.
Right, thanks. Next one is, what if an exiter has completed only 1 year post-secondary education and decides they want to take a break while still in exit follow-up services?
Okay, so here's my answer. Who asked that, Mark? I'm sorry, I just want to read it.
Annabelle Morales. I think here is, we might need a little more information, but it appears that they didn't complete anything. And if we're talking about the credential attainment rate, it seems like they stopped going to training or education, and so there's not a positive outcome. Even if and follow-up services, once that year passes, we can no longer count it. Okay, so if we're talking about three different measures here that they're for sure going to impact your second and fourth quarter employment or education. So if you exit someone and they go ahead to complete a whole year of post-secondary education, that's a year. So you could document post-secondary in the second and fourth quarter. Then if they want to quit before they actually got the credential, then they're not going to give you your credential because they don't have the credential within a year. But if you document that they're in post-secondary in their second and fourth quarter after exit, but they're not even working, so that's your first two measures of positives. They won't be in your median. And if they didn't get any credentials in that whole year after they exit, then they won't be a positive for your credential. Does that make sense? So. Yeah, I think that's key to realize the big difference between some of these measures. That the first two, as you said, you don't have to complete the education to attain a positive there. You just have to be in it. Whereas in the credential, you have to complete it and get your credential in order to get credential attainment, not just be in the training. Yeah, so that's key. So with that.
For Annabelle, now this person, maybe they exited and maybe they were an out-of-school youth and you never even put them in education or training when they were working with you. then you find out that they went ahead and went to college. If it was an out-of-school youth and you guys didn't fund any education or training, they wouldn't even be in your credential. But all your youth are going to be in the first two measures. So yes, sorry, go ahead. And
Yeah, okay. So LaDonna asks, if an in-school youth obtains an industry recognized credential, but does not have their high school diploma or GED, does the industry recognized credential count as a credential? For example, if school youth obtains CNA license, but does not obtain high school license, are they a positive in credential?
yes. So yes, because it won't negate an industry post-secondary credential if for some reason they don't have a high school diploma or equivalent. The high school diploma is just the first condition to meet the second rule, because it's seeing like if they have their, a licensure or credential, that is the credential. It's saying if you only get someone a high school diploma or equivalent, we need another additional outcome for us to see them as a positive in this measure. I hope that makes sense. So yes, I think we talked about this too. It's like, can you have someone who actually has no diploma or equivalent, and how did they get a post-secondary? But there's ways. You guys educate me on that stuff. I don't see these.
Yeah, I think there's some training programs in education that don't require a high school diploma in order to enroll. So you could certainly, and some of them would meet some of these. You could test into, let's say, an associate's program.
Right.
So if you have a high school education, but you tested into it, maybe you might not be a youth, but you might be someone who is older. Youth meaning very young, but you might be old enough to have enough knowledge and background to pass testing and get into the program, even though you don't have your high school diploma. So yeah, you got to break down by the pieces and understand that, for the credential, first thing is, am I in the measure? So that means I'm in the denominator. Second is, did I achieve something to get a positive outcome to be in the numerator? And simply having a credential, industry recognized credential, get you in that numerator. Has nothing to do with 2 or 3 or 4 pieces all the time, having to come together. Some instances maybe, but in this instance, no. And I notice we've got a few more questions. We'll move on. But as you're putting those questions in, if you in the 2 section, I think it's good that everybody can see these questions. Hopefully I'm not putting anyone on the spot, but sent those directly to just Paula and I. But go ahead and select everyone in that 2 when you send your message so that others can see what the questions are we're reading. They might have a different perspective of what the question is. So this next one comes out of just something that Paul and I are able to see. But if an out-of-school youth enters into academic post-secondary, meaning college, university, probably I'm assuming leading to associate's, bachelor's, or higher, as a freshman, would it count if she complete 1 semester of education as a measurable skill gain, or only if they attain that associate's or bachelor's? And I don't know if you want to keep that one until we get through the MSG, Paula.
Well, I did write a response. Yes. So yeah, you're going to need to know that semester, and it is part MSG and I think part credential. So you have a whole year to get that credential, get him or her to earn that credential and get it documented. But yes, they need the full-blown degree credential to count for the credential measure, whereas the MSG is more thinking of like increments or smaller gains on their way. I keep saying full-blown credential that we're talking about. So I hope that makes sense.
Okay, then we had one. Okay, thanks, Paula. We had one that says, and I don't know what this acronym states, so if the person that sent this would mind, unless you know, Paula, it says, does a credential have to be in an HGHD?
I responded.
Occupation and WIOA approved training in order to count. And the simple answer to that is,
I think you mean high growth, high demand, right, Meg?
Yeah, probably.
So the thing is, this is kind of like one thing leads to another. If they're an in-school youth, obviously, if that's just tutoring secondary, that's not really viewed as a high growth, high demand occupation. If you're talking about like the demand occupation list and the ETPL training providers, that doesn't even apply to your in-school youth. If you have an out-of-school youth and they need to go beyond alternative school or secondary, it's pretty much goes without saying that the only programs you'll be able to enroll them in are WIOA approved funded training. So we have to assume, since you're only going to be able to fund a WIOA approved training program, the credential, if they get one, will be recognized. And yes, so the other part of that we can get into, if you have someone who is in the measure because you funded training, and say it was an occupation and it's on our state WIOA approved funded training list, and you exit them regardless of how they ended that training program, and they end up receiving another type of occupational skills licensure or something for another little training that they did on their own, that would count as well. But I hope that answered the question. So technically, it's better if it's ideal when the training, the WIOA funded training, led to the credential after they exit and employment, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if you funded an approved training program and they got a credential. It should be recorded and documented up to 365 days after exit.
All right, so we got one more. I appreciate all the input that others are putting in to help us clarify some of these. But love that you're all assisting us here and clarifying some of the acronyms and other means of gaining an outcome, a positive outcome. I think another one here is, if an enrolled participant is exited due to incarceration and is serving more than 1 year jail time, are they excluded? We'll get to exclusions later on, Tricia. So if you can just hold your question until we get to that, we'll let you know that. And then Lucas is kind of responding to what you just said. Or no, talking about high school equivalency. Yeah. But Crystal kind of answered that, Tricia, that there is a reason there, but we'll explain that a little bit more. So that looks like the last of our questions. Appreciate all of those. We'll go ahead on.
Anissa just said something. I just with the high school question that LaDonna asked, and then someone said, good to know. If your training programs are requiring an HSE or equivalent, you really want to aim for making sure your participants wind up with the high school diploma or equivalent. And I've heard Department of Labor teams indicate that before, like, oh, of course, we're not going to hold you back. We're not going to ding you or say your credential for CNA didn't count if that person never had a high school diploma or equivalent. But it should probably be something that they, try to get along the way. So I'm just noting that based on that response.
Okay, so we'll finish up the credential. I apologize. I thought I put that scenario after the special rule, but I didn't. So Paul, we'll jump back to you to move through the special rule and then into MSG, and then we'll have an opportunity to take more questions and have a couple more scenarios near the end.
Okay. Okay, so is this next slide? We're talking about the special rule. I lost track of where we were. Okay.
Our scenario, right?
We did talk about it, but just not. Okay, so this will be your slide of reference whenever we're talking about the special rule related to that secondary diploma. So if you think about it, if you exit someone and all they have is their secondary school diploma or equivalent, that's not enough. So in the following year, you need to gain information and work with them during follow-up and find out if their employment, we might get their wages, we might not. You need to document that. And if they go on to post-secondary, education or training, that needs to be documented, and then that will equate to their credential, a positive. It's like a condition. The high school diploma is not enough, so we need that second outcome to be recorded in a system of record in a year to count for your positive. Otherwise, that person, you'll be like, wait, why isn't this person hitting, in the system as a positive? Well, they're sitting there in the system's eyes with only a high school diploma. It didn't count them. So next slide, please. Okay, these slides, Workforce GPS provided them, and these are my favorite slides, some of them, when talking about the credential attainment rate measure and how it's calculated, and the credentials that count and when they hit, and who's in the measure. It's basically a big decision path. So to save us on time, because I want Mark to be able to talk about his scenarios, I'll just make you very aware that these exist in this PowerPoint. And if you ever can print them, that would be great for your decision path. So next slide, please. These are characteristics when you start thinking about credential, when we use the terms industry recognized, stackable, portable, accredited. These characteristics strengthen values of credentials. So when you think about credential, it's a big package of types of developmental skills and things that are recognized, like all of these. So I won't read them, but they're right here. They're sequential. They build up an individual's qualifications. They inhibit all types of not necessarily just career pathways, but employers like them, they want them, they might make more money, they have these. So please just use this as a reference when in your mind you're trying to determine a credential. Secondary diploma or equivalent, this is a reference right out of the performance Teagle and the credential Teagle. And should always be referenced if you ever have any credential questions about documenting a secondary diploma or equivalent, please. That's slide 46. And next slide, please. Okay, so for the primary indicators of performance for youth, we always stick in this need to know, and it's all these little things and their operational parameters under the calculation of a measure that you have to consider about these measures. And so you have an entire year to earn a credential. If you get it during the program, even better, it's documented, it counts. But the thing about credentials, they have to be documented. Our system can't go out there and upload any types of credentials or other outcomes like post-secondary. You really only need one credential during a period of participation or within the year after exit to count as a positive, but follow-up is always key when you exit someone and you know they haven't fulfilled the requirements for the credential measure. And then I know that all their credentials are recorded, but only the industry recognized credentials are captured at exits and counted, because those are what are reported to DOL. So systems do check that to make sure it's the credentials that they recognize. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to talk about quickly a layered measure. It's called Measurable Skills Gains, and there are multiple types of gains that we can record. So it's back to your youth participants. All in-school youth are going to be in this measure. All in-school youth, no matter what. Out-of-school youth who go into training, like an occupational skills training for youth, those are going to wind up being counted in this measure too. So that's very important to know. And it's not just documenting one credential, as I said, like the main credential. This is documenting gains, incremental things like tests and achievements along the way in getting their credential. So it's every single year someone's participating in your program and in training. Next slide, please. Again, it looks for youth, it looks just like the credential measure. Who's in the measure? All in-school youth, out-of-school youth who you enroll in training. And they're going to be in the measure every year they participate until you exit them. So it's different. I said you just need one credential. You need a measurable skills gain recorded for all your youth participants every year they participate. Next slide, please. And this is just how we calculate it. It's the same division, and then that will yield a rate or calculation. I think MSGs for youth is pretty low, but it should be on the up and up because we have better ways to collect them, determine them, and we're looking for them now. Next slide, please. Okay, 5 types of measurable skills gain. Mark created this slide, and so there's your measurable skills gain, one measure. The tricky part is that under this one measure, there are 5 different types of gains that we want to collect and we're looking for. Hard part is that you need to know about them. Easy part for this measure is you have a bunch of different ways to achieve and report positive outcomes and success in this measure. So if you look at it that way, we'll talk about each type. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. So the types of MSGs, the first one is the educational functioning level. This is easy. The system will calculate this based on a pre and post test. So someone who takes a pre-test and a gain of 1 level, educational functioning level, is documented in the system of record. They're counted as a positive for an MSG in that program year. A secondary diploma or equivalent. So document a high school diploma for a participant in secondary school. That is an MSG. Next slide, please. Secondary or post-secondary transcripts or report cards. This type or concept of MSG is simply recognizing when you have someone who is in secondary or like high school or in occupational skills training, college classes, and they're achieving their gains, they're appearing, showing up for class, getting good grades. There's rules that differentiate part-time or full-time for post-secondary, but regardless, anyone you know in these trainings, if they're moving along successfully and you document that success as a secondary or post-secondary transcript or report card, that is one type of MSG. Please refer to these rules regarding post-secondary, so your college youth. Full-time have to achieve a minimum of 12 credits in 1 semester. When they're part-time, well, we know they won't achieve 12 credits in 1 semester. So we let you split those credits. They need to be back to back. So basically, if you have a part-timer and they have 7 credits worth of straight A's in the spring, and then 5 more A's and B, I use straight A's as an example, in fall, that fall, when they finally hit their 12 successful credits, that's when you document the MSG. And there's a lot of information regarding this, and I would be glad to answer any questions at the end that you have to, and even put in writing if you have any real specific question regarding this MSG and full-time, part-time. Next slide, please. Okay, so the 4th is a training milestone. So these are things that aren't so hard and fast, like progress reports from an employer, a pay stub showing they just got a big raise because they learned so much. In an OJT, they offered to pay them more. Other milestones from an employer, any type of progress reports from a teacher, just saying this person is really learning on their way to get their credential. So that's the 4th. The 5th and final MSG is we call it skills progression, diploma, certificate, degree. Skills progression is documented by exams, passing exams that are required to get into a particular occupation, or document any progress in attaining technical or occupational skills. So they can just be trade-related benchmarks like knowledge-based exams. So those types of things that lead them, that are moving them along and eventually will lead to their degree should be documented as a skills progression diploma, certificate, or degree, as well as a high school diploma. So those are the 5 types of MSGs. And next slide, please. This is another reference slide to go back to in case something comes up. These are all pretty much based on real life scenarios that we've seen and questions and Q&As that come up in the field. So you won't be the only ones to wonder about the answers that we put in this need to know. So that's a reference as well. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an example of counting periods of participation, especially for measurable skills gains. Like I said, it's not based on exits. The second you enroll an in-school youth or an out-of-school youth or put them in training, they're on the hook for the measurable skills gain measure every year, which for the measurable skills gain is July 1st through June 30th, every single program year. They need a gain. Like that's why it's, you know, it's gains. It's not the credential. It's impossible to get a credential for some people every year. But for gains, we're looking for other ways that they're moving along in their training successfully and gaining skills. So next slide, please. Okay, I will let Mark talk about what you asked about for exclusions of performance and exits. And then, sorry that I moved so fast, just email us with any questions that I didn't cover so Mark can talk about the scenarios we have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and since we only had a couple quick questions, we'll go ahead and answer those. First one is, can a youth earn an MSG after they are exited? And Paula just said that, you know, and this kind of depicts it. You have to earn that during your participation, and you need to earn at least one in each program you participate, program year you participate. So it's key to note here in this second year, while it's only a few months, you still have to document and gain an MSG before you exit in order to get a positive outcome. If you don't gain that, then you are going to be in the measure in the denominator, but not in the numerator. It would be a negative. So the MSG has to be gained before exit.
Yeah, and not necessarily, yes, and yes, before exit. But if their exit date, if you're talking about is like April, and they got a gain based on, you know, that training or whatever before June 30th, that MSG could count in that program year. But the date has to fall in accordance with the program year. You couldn't exit someone on July 2nd and they were never in training and then throw an MSG on there from like July 30th, they wouldn't even be in the measure. So yes, and it's based on the exit date and the date of the MSG falling in that year.
Okay, and then another question, out-of-school youth who receive career services and a paid work experience or work-based learning are not an MSG or credential measure, is that correct? Because
Correct.
Those aren't training? Okay. Because as said there, they're not considered training, which doesn't put them in the measure.
Yes, they're work-based learning. Yes. Not
okay, and then
exactly.
Kirsten, when you get a chance, can you repeat the link to the document, the PowerPoint document here? We've got someone maybe joined a little bit late so that they can access that. The next one is, do they have a year to earn their credential or to be enrolled in the program? And so for that, they have a year after exit from the program. So that 1 year of required follow-up services for youth, they can attain their credential, right, Paula?
Yes, when you say enrolled in the program, they need to be enrolled in a training program during participation, obviously, like to even count in the credential measure. And then after that, at exit, they have an entire year. I hope that makes sense. So you have their application, and then for an in-school youth, they're in it automatically. So the whole time they're participating before they exit, like an in-school youth, they get their credential, great. But if they don't, and they're exited because you can no longer provide them services or whatever reason, they have a year after they leave your program and during follow-up to get the credential. So
okay. And then thanks. And then the next one, can skills progression include successful completion of something such as a food handler certificate? Would that be considered an MSG, even though it wouldn't be considered a credential?
That is, we're kind of in discussion on that now. In conjunction with a note from an employer indicating success on the job, not just completion of the food handling certificate.
Okay, and then
I think that makes sense. Jennifer, summer counts, and I'm sorry, I was trying to rush through that.
I think, yeah, the question is when we say consecutive semesters for that 12 credit hours and consecutive semesters, it also has to occur within a calendar year, right, Paula?
Yes. So that's
so you couldn't, you know, and I think the question we're still waiting on is this consecutive. So if, you know, because not everyone goes to school in summer. So if I complete a semester, spring semester, and then jump to the fall semester, which is what most people typically do, is that considered consecutive, or is it no longer consecutive because the summer semester broke it up? So I think we have to clarify that. It's a good question. Is it consecutive by the participants, you know, participation in school? So if they went to if they went spring and fall, they could still complete both of those within a calendar year, and they're their consecutive semesters because they didn't go to summer. But if you,
and there was an MSG the MSG webinar, I mean, it was literally this long on just MSGs, and we did all types of scenarios. So like Jennifer, if you had someone who was in part-time 9 hours in spring, somehow they got 3 credits quickly in June, that would equate 12 successfully before June 30th in that program year. However, if you only have someone in part-time in spring and they skip the entire summer, you don't get to count their MSG until they follow up in that next semester. See, it's splitting your years of MSGs you need. So you can't count on a transcript for a part-time college student kind of rolls over. It starts the clock again for MSG on July 1st. If that makes any sense whatsoever, but you just need Christine, you really only have until we close reporting, so that won't be long. It's probably 30 days, because when we stop reporting, we have to run annual performance, and then your MSGs will be missing if you don't get them in until after we do that.
Yeah, and really what we ask in policy, Christine, and for everyone, anytime service occurs or you're made aware of something like someone gaining a credential or MSG or something, we really ask that you put it in the system within 10 days, because that keeps us up to date, keeps our system up to date, and keeps us as accurate as possible. So we really would like for you, through policy, dictates that you should be entering all of these things in your system of record within 10 days. But to Paula's point, there is a little bit of data lag. And so, if you
realize it,
days after, it would still be tracked. But the problem is, if you wait too long, then you miss that MSG measure, and it's so critical because every program year you need to achieve that. If you forgot about it, or summer got away from you and you didn't enter it, and then we turned in all the information to DOL, well, it's too late for us to go back, and so you've lost that MSG measure. So it's really critical you do it as soon as possible. We'd really like it in 10 days, and we don't want you to miss out on any of these measures if at all possible. I'm going to go ahead and jump to this last couple slides here. We do have a couple scenarios, and I know we've got a little bit away from us on time. If anyone wants to stick around for the scenarios, I'll do those after we get through these last few slides, if people do have some extra time. But we've had a lot of great discussion, great questions, just showing you why we needed a session like this, because there are just some intriguing interesting and very critical questions that have been asked. So we talked through all these measures, or most of these measures, about potential exclusions from the measure. What that first means is it means they're not going to be in the denominator. So, in some cases we say all youth are included in the denominator. They're all in the, well, there are exclusions that apply. And you see here, there are 4 exclusions that apply to all 3 of our Title I programs. The top 4 here, meaning adult, dislocated worker, and youth, and only 1 of them that apply to youth only. So someone asked earlier about the incarceration, and these first 4 measures, they have to occur prior to or be reason for the exit. So if somebody is incarcerated after they exit the program, you're still on the hook for any measures that they would have otherwise been included in. So let's say someone goes through the program, they are in follow-up, you're waiting for them hopefully to get a credential, and they get incarcerated for something that occurred. You're on the hook for that because the program exit has already occurred. And incarceration, while at that point when they're in jail or prison or whatever happens to them, they can't attain their credential. Unfortunately, that becomes a negative on their record. And so it's critical to get as much as you can, as early as you can. But all of these top 4, again, have to occur or be the reason for their exit. These 90 days are periods of when the medical treatment might start, when the call up to service might occur. And it's because, we expect that some kind of service is going to occur in a 90-day period. So if they're only called up, let's say for 10 days to help with a flood down in Southern Illinois, it's expected, since it's only 10 days, that they still have enough time participating in the program to gain whatever one of these 5 measures it was that you're trying to achieve. The foster care one obviously would only apply to the youth program. And this one's the only one that doesn't have to occur at exit or prior to exit, be reason for exit. And that's if they're in the foster care system and they have to be moved for whatever reasons. We can come up with quite a few reasons why they might be moved from the current location to another location. But if that occurs, then they can be excluded from the performance measure and the denominator. And then we just mentioned follow-up, because a lot of these we talk about, you have a year's worth of follow-up, and we want to just remind you, these are the type of follow-up services that need to be occurring during that 1-year period of time. And they aren't reasons for program exit, they occur after program exit. And then finally, there's some measures here that were applicable to PY 2020 and some that apply to 2022. For most of you, that's not really relevant. For the performance folks, just be mindful of what the periods of assessment are, and we pass those on to you locally. Again, I'll pass through these 2 scenarios. I'll come back to them if anyone sticks around. I want to get to this last slide here and then thank everyone. We've been showing all of our progression through webinars. When we get to this program exit one, we'll kind of recap all the ones we've been through, get you a link to those. You can go to them down here to register to get word if you've not been getting information on all of our webinars. But we had some of them scheduled for January and February coming up. We've had a conflict come up yesterday with both of those dates. So please note that the dates for the next 2 sessions have changed. And so if you were planning on attending next week, if you've already registered, you're going to get notification from Illinois State University, the ICSPS folks, Kirsten and the staff there, that it's changed to February 2nd. You don't have to go back and register. You're just going to get information. Your calendar is going to change, hopefully, and you're already ready to join. We hope you're able to join us on February 2nd. We do apologize that this occurred. We just didn't have any control of it, and it's information and a meeting that we have to participate as state performance staff. So please mark your calendars accordingly. We've also been saying for a period of time, February 9th, we were going to be doing a session on what we call a virtual roundtable, where we're going to sit down. All these scenarios we set, we're going to actually expand on them even further, and all the different variables that could occur with a participant, and let you talk through it as a small group. We'll break you all out into different breakout rooms and come up with your own responses to whether they're in a measure, whether they're not in the measure, whether they're a positive, whether they're a negative, and give us some reasons why, and then come back and share those with everybody. So that's been switched to February 23rd, gives us a little bit more time to prepare for that. Anybody that wants to help us with that, as far as being someone that, if you've been around performance and WIOA, WIA for years, and you want to help us develop those scenarios, please email Paula or myself. Let us know. We really would like to have some of your input so we can create some really good scenarios to share with all the groups. And then you'll notice a new one down here. On February 16th, we're going to schedule a session on the demand occupation training list. And the reason for that is a couple. First is we are changing our systems, including the IWDS system, the Illinois Workforce Development System, Illinois WorkNet that tracks our demand occupations, and the Career Connect system up there in local area 7 to reflect 2019 standard occupational codes, or SOC code / ONET codes. And so in doing that, there's a lot of things that are going to change that we want to make you aware of before the go live date, which I think at this point is going to be February 21st. We'll give you information prior to these dates, such as an updated WIOA notice informing you of what all the changes are. We will be translating the current demand occupation training list with 2010 codes into a new 2019 version. No occupations are going to be lost. Some of the titles might change, and certainly several of those ONET codes will change. But if an occupation is in demand today, it will be in demand under the new rules. It might just have a different number. So we want to make sure we're all understanding of what changes are occurring to the system, to the list, what you need to know as career planners if you're going to join us. And we're going to do that on February 16th. And then the rest of these will continue to build out the rest of our year of training and webinars to keep you informed of other topics. And as happened with the demand occupation training list, there might be others we throw in here as we find out that there's a need. So if you have needs, you feel you have a topic that would be good for a webinar, share those with Paul and myself, and we'll look into it and see what we can do. If you have needs that are specific to yourself, let us know, and we'll have a conversation, maybe meet with you on a call or webinar and try and address those specifically. Here's our information, Paul and mine. We appreciate your joining us today. As Kirsten has said at the beginning, she's going to send you in the chat a link to a survey. Please complete that. Let us know how we did today. And we want to keep growing in our presentations, in our webinars information. So we want to hear from you about that. And now, if anyone, we still got 100 some of you on. If all of you want to stick around, I have no problem spending another 15-20 minutes on a couple other scenarios. I'm going to go back to those. I don't see any other questions. We appreciate your time. If Kirsten, you can stick around, leave this live to go through these two scenarios. That way, if someone else has to hop off, we can, they can go back to the recorded version, and she'll also give you a link to that. And you'll get these links in an email, if I'm correct. Remember in our past sessions, you'll get an email tomorrow or shortly thereafter with the survey link. If you aren't able to complete it today, please be sure to do it tomorrow or very soon while everything's fresh in your mind. And again, thanks for participating. We'll scroll back now to a couple scenarios. Hope some of you will join us and help us walk through these. So the first one here, this is our second scenario for the youth. We've got Sarah, who is a WIOA out of school youth, OSY, participating in mentoring and an internship. After completing that internship, the employer she was working with hired her full time. Great. That's what we want to see out of all these types of services. She exited the program shortly after, thinking she had no other needs from the program as far as services, and remained employed until the third week of the fourth quarter after exit. So let's say she exited June 30th. She has 4 quarters. It says she's going into that fourth quarter, which would be April through June of the following year, and she's still employed in that third week. And that's critical when you think through this. So of the 5 measures, which ones are she included? Not which ones are she positive or negative. We just want to know which ones are she in, is she in based on what you've learned today. And we've got all of those listed here. If you can send up the poll, Kirsten, for them to complete. Yeah, so let us know what you think. Is she in? And you can select multiples, because as we know, as we've been learning, you're going to find out that in most cases, a participant's going to be in more than one measure and in some cases will be in all 5 measures. So select all those you think are appropriate, and then we'll quickly here jump to the responses and let you know which ones it is. So again, activities were mentoring and internship, employed during participation, and employed after participation 4 quarters later. Looks like most people are responding that she is in employment and education or training 2nd quarter and 4th quarter. Okay, so it looks like we're not allowing you to do multiple selection. Apologize for that. We'll jump to the response and let you know of each of those 5 which ones she's included at and so the correct answer here is A, B, and C. She's in both the employment measures. Remember, all of our youth are in these measures, and she's included in median earnings because we know she's employed. So here's what we're saying here with the second one. Second bullet here is that she's in both the youth and 2nd and 4th quarters because she's enrolled as a participant. She's automatically in it. Also, because it says she's employed, we assume we're going to be able to capture some wages during that 2nd quarter after exit. It said she was employed from the time before she exited the program till 3 weeks into the 4th quarter. But all we really need to do is capture that 2nd quarter wages, and she's in the median earnings, and we'll calculate the median earnings for the local area accordingly. But she's not in the 4th and 5th measures, which are credential attainment and measurable skill gain, because she's not in an education or training program. Remember, internships and mentoring are not considered training programs for the youth. They are just career services. So that's why she's not included in either credential attainment or measurable skill gains, and would not be a negative though, because she's not in there at all. She's not forced into those 2 measures in the denominator. And since she hasn't achieved anything as far as a credential or MSG, she's not a positive. So hopefully that's a little bit clear, a little bit more detail here, thinking on how this works out. We'll go to this next and last one. And we've got John, who is an in-school youth participant. He's in the 11th grade, assuming junior year, received some WIOA services, preparing hopefully to be employed once he leaves school. Participates in a summer youth employment program after completing that school year. He exits the youth program in August following completion of the summer. Again, feels like he doesn't need any more services. And in January of that year, he continues his education in high school, doesn't get employed during that quarter, and then graduates high school in June. He finally begins employment in October. Again, just looking at which measures he's in, and we apologize if you're only going to be, this one looks like you have multiple choice. So you have all 5 of the measures to choose from. Please select all that you feel this individual, this participant would be included in from the denominator, and then we'll let you know whether they're a positive or a negative. Give you just a few more seconds. I know we're going through these quick, but I know we've already held you over a little bit, so don't want to spend too much time, and we're going to explain the appropriate response. We've got pretty much across the board, all 5 measures being selected, MSG being the least selected. Everyone kind of closely in agreement that he should be in employment, the 2 employment or education training measures. Quite a few have said median earnings. However, that's the one measure he is not going to be in. So we see here A, B, D, and E going in order. C is the one he is not going to be included in. He's a positive in employment or education training 2nd quarter. This one's pretty detailed when you think back to this scenario. When all these events are happening, it's critical to know when things are happening to know if he's going to be in that measure or not. You got to know period of participation. Got to know the program exit date, which we know back here is August. Even though he was in the program well before that, and he continued education after that. The keys here are he was in education or training, so he's in positive in the 2nd quarter measure. But if you look back at the measure, he's not in anything 4 quarters after exit. So while he's in the measure, he is a negative on the employment rate fourth quarter, I'm sorry, which is that period of July through September, because again, he exited the program in August. So the fourth quarter after that would be July through September of the following year. He's not even in the median earnings measure because he was never employed during the second quarter. He doesn't get employed till quite a bit after that when he started working part-time. So he wouldn't even be in the measure. Wouldn't be, I mean, there's not really a positive or negative outcome for the median earnings rate. It's a dollar figure. And here we have no wages, so he's not included. Moving down to the last two measures, he would be in the credential attainment measure, although he's not a positive because we've got to go back to that special rule Paul talked about, and that we kind of included in the first scenario. If he's in high school, gets his diploma, he's got to do something more than that within a 1 year program exit. And again, back to the scenario, his program exit was August of 1 year. And we probably should have put years on here, but if you just play this out, he doesn't go to work until October the following year. It's just assumed August to January. Now we're into a new calendar year. October of that year would be more than 1 year after. So follow-up's complete, and we didn't gain that employment or credential. So the special rule does not apply for him, even though he's in the measure. He is now a negative because of that. And then finally, he would have earned 2 measurable skill gains because his participation was over 2 program years. The first one here, when he enrolled prior to July of this year, he leaves the program. And since he was in the program after July 1st of this year, when he finally exits a month or so later, he has to gain an MSG that semester as well. Or I'm sorry, that program year as well. So you'll see here, he's gained a high school education transcript training milestones of the summer youth program, could have given him the MSG of the first program year, and then he would have also gained one when he exited out, before he exited out that second year. So went through those fairly quickly. This one is a little bit more detailed in looking at every single one of these measures and understanding, you first determine, are you even in the measure? So are you in that denominator? And then going back to all the rules, are you in the numerator to be a positive once you're in that denominator? So appreciate your time. I didn't see any questions, concerns. Hope I didn't go through that too quickly. But you've got access to this PowerPoint. Look it over. As you look at it, if you feel like you're confused about why he's in or not in, or a positive or a negative in any of these scenarios, scroll back through the slides themselves. We've had a good team helping us develop these locally. We hope we've got these all accurate. And so, you should be able to rely on all the slides to determine and help you, kind of dissect each of these and figure out what the outcomes should be. Again, we appreciate your time. Those of you that were able to stick around here for a little bit longer, we're going to keep building these out for that roundtable. If you're able to join us for that, we're still building up the webinar materials for that, as well as the scenarios. And we're going to give you a little bit more of this kind of scenario where you're going to see a participant from enrollment through exit, through follow-up in all 3 of our programs, youth and adult and dislocated worker. And we're going to have you go through these kind of scenarios and say, are they in the measure? Are they a positive? Are they a negative? What are the key elements of the information you're given that helps you determine that? So again, thank you. Have a great day, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks when we do the program exit. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for that one. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.